There are only a couple of events each year in the off-campus student housing industry that brings all of the industry leaders together. The premier event for the industry is the Interfaith Student Housing Conference in Austin, Texas. For 2022, this event was held in early May and brought over 1,300 attendees. Student Housing Insight took the opportunity to sit down with 3 CEOs from those firms to discuss their outlook on the industry, lessons learned from the pandemic, and opportunities for growth, and a complete who's who list of executives from management and development firms under one roof at the JW Marriott in Austin for 3 days of sessions, roundtables, and networking. So buckle up for some amazing insight. This is Student Housing Insight's annual episode of From the Top. Well, gentlemen, welcome to the Student Housing Insight podcast. We're doing this live remote at the 14th annual Interfaith Student Housing Conference in Austin, Texas. This is one of the few times out of the year that we can all get under the same roof and have some conversations like this. So it's a great excuse for me to bring my podcast equipment and sit down with leaders in our industry to kind of get their perspective. And that's what I want to do today with you guys. But really quick for our audience, Bob, we'll start with you if you want to introduce yourself and we'll go around the table.
Sure. I'm Bob Clark and I'm the CEO of PeakMade. And I actually got into student housing November 2003. And 19 years ago, the sector was quite a bit different than it is today. In many respects, but very simply, in 2003, Wall Street really didn't understand student housing, and every conversation started with, what is it? You know, how do you make money in it? Where's the risks? Don't students tear up the communities? I mean, how
do you just lease a bedroom?
How do you lease just a bedroom? Everybody's frame of reference was the movie Animal House. And so a lot of the conversations were convincing Wall Street, convincing investors and lenders that it wasn't. It was a good, safe, cash flow asset class. And so PeakMade is headquartered in Atlanta, Georgia. We have anywhere we flex, our portfolio flexes between 75 to 95 properties, depending upon innies and outies. We have a development business as well, where we develop 2 to 4 student housing assets at any given point in time. And Wes, thank you for having me.
Yeah. Brent?
How you doing, Wes? Brent Gutwein. I'm the CEO of Granite Student Living. And we're based in West Lafayette, Indiana, the flyover drive-through state, if you ever want to pass through. Got into this business kicking and screaming back in 2008. Said I'd stay in for 6 months, turn things around, and I forgot to leave. So now we have about 10,000 beds and about 100 employees, give or take 10 on any day. And, in dog years, that's 98 years I've been in the business. So.
All right. Thanks for having me. This is Jim Sholders. I am the CEO for Campus Life and Style. I have been in this business for 33 years. So I started in 1989 as a resident assistant in a privately run residence hall with Allen and O'Hara. Happy to be getting free room and board. And one thing led to another. 13 years on site all over the country, most in the Southeast. And then got into the corporate side of things, was with ACC for quite a few years and helped them build their platform there. And then we started Campus Life and Style. In 2015, started incubating and building our platform and started running the Vesper Holdings portfolio properties in 2016. So we've grown since then. We're currently 46 properties. 36 owned, 10 third party. Third party is a new thing for us. We've just recently kind of tipped our hat into that in a small way. About 26,000 beds. Do a lot of value add, a lot of repositioning, and that's us.
Now, when you got started, with Alan O'Hara, because that's been kind of a common theme over the past 6 months on this podcast, is what was Alan O'Hara doing, when they started things out in student housing. So were you on one of the larger, like, Granville Tower kind of thing in Chapel Hill? Or
so I was a student at West Virginia University.
Okay.
So they had 3 properties there. I was an RA at one of them, and then went to be an AGM at Summit Hall. And Bill Bayless and I share that as a common theme. And then I went down to Chapel Hill, involved with Granville Towers. I did some work with A&O and Greensboro, some third-party work. And so most of my time was spent in Chapel Hill. Yes, sir.
Gotcha. So, guys, we're 2 years into this pandemic. I think this industry, this sector of the industry has weathered it very well. I know in March of 2020, April of 2020, we were all jumping on Zoom calls and talking about, how things were going with pre-leasing and collections. Everybody was really worried about collections. And I think all in all, we feel really good about how the industry came through that.
Sure.
Yeah, I just want to get some perspective from you guys on, what has stood out within your companies of, what you learned through that experience, and, any kind of outlook on how you think that's kind of geared your team for the future.
Yeah, I mean, I'll jump in. I think, the one thing that's good for all of us in this room is that, kids want in-person learning, right? They want to go to school. And, I heard so many people pontificate about lots of different things during COVID. And one of them was they don't need to go to college anymore because they can do it from home because they were doing it via Zoom. Yeah. And it showed that, for the most part, yes, there was some tough times and, all kinds of crazy things going on, but the kids are back and they want to be there. And so I think that's a really important thing. And then I think, secondarily, it's just looking back at this time where COVID's kind of winding down, and it's that expression, this too shall pass kind of thing. It's like, this is one of those, a few times in our career type challenges and situations that we all got into. And so, you go through it and you look back and you say, it's just so important just to stay grounded, and everybody's crazy and all the hysteria and everything that goes on. It's our jobs, as leaders of our companies in the industry, to just keep people grounded and run our companies calmly through whatever situations we have.
So Jim, it's interesting. Let me just add, I'm convinced any leader focuses on communication. But over the last 2 years, at least in my view, the communication component as leaders really got accentuated. I mean, if you weren't communicating in a world-class way, absence any communication, people draw their own conclusions.
Yeah.
But when I look back over the last 2 years, what I can say from my vantage point within the Peak walls is and I'm sure every operator feels the same way, is it was amazing the resilience that the people on site had. I was in my home office every day. I didn't leave my house for gosh knows how long, but they still had to show up and do the things that they had to do to provide housing to the residents that we serve. And their resilience was just absolutely amazing. And what blows me away is how many great things got done across the nation at all the student housing communities when no one was looking.
Yep. Yeah.
And, it's something that we all should be proud of. And then the last thing I'd say is that I think as a sector, it's unprecedented how the sector came together and collaborated. I know everybody knows kind of what was going on there, but it's staggering how we came together as competitors and collaborated to make sure that we weren't doing things that were against the broader benefit of the sector.
Good point.
I mean, a pandemic's not a run-of-the-mill event, right? There's always going to be change. There's always going to be challenges. And I think what we saw internally from an organizational standpoint is the separation of the really stellar people who embrace the challenges and really learned how to pivot and adapt, and then what I call the slackers who kind of latched on to the litany of excuses. Okay, so it really gave us a platform of who we wanted in leadership positions to go to the next level. So it was a great opportunity. Not that I never asked for another pandemic.
Right.
I'm old enough. Maybe we're not going to get there in my lifetime, but it's exciting when we learn.
Yeah.
When we really take away what we learned.
Well, and I want to stop there with you for just a second because, both Bob and Jim are, have got national portfolios, and there's and that consists of a lot of different type of product, but you're a regional operator for the most part, and you've even got single family homes and that type of thing. I'm just kind of curious, through the pandemic, was that product type, was it easier or harder to manage, to lease, to?
Yes. I don't know. I don't know if it was easier or harder. It was more market based. It seemed like, more than product based.
More private, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah. Some of the other markets I've seen where there's a pretty good footprint of what we call the shadow market. It seems like they did, especially if they had single family home rentals, they did really well compared to leased up earlier. And I just didn't know if you would experience that or not.
I mean, we do everything, and individual leasing probably was more of a challenge than the joint lease products. So I'd say that's probably the biggest separation as far as product type. It's really your lease type.
And I think both of you guys have cottage product in your portfolios. Mm-hmm. Did you guys notice any difference between those assets versus the others
During COVID?
Yeah.
Not anything that, comes to mind. Maybe there was a difference, but nothing. It was subtle if it was.
I can't say anything that comes to specifically to mind, but we certainly were, marketing the private accommodations and the room to breathe and all that type of stuff for obvious reasons, because that's what people were looking for.
And I bet if you go back a year and a half ago, we all believed that the separation and the COVID impact would have a really long tail.
Right.
I suspect that tail is going to end up being really small,
real quick,
especially with college students.
Yeah.
They don't care.
Yeah.
They didn't care back in the heart of it. They certainly don't care now.
Well, my kids definitely did not want to be at home, so they went back to school.
So let's put the past behind us, because I'm ready to put COVID behind us. But start thinking about the next 3 to 5 years. We've certainly going through a period of inflation now. We're sitting here on May 4th. Feds just raised the rates. We had a huge announcement in the past couple of weeks about Blackstone acquiring ACC. So I want to just kind of get from you guys, what do you think the landscape is going to look like in the next 3 to 5 years for the industry, both from finance and investment side, and also how does that impact things on the operations side?
Well, I forgot to pack my crystal ball, but my own take on things is Blackstone didn't spend $13 billion to stop there, so certainly they will continue to be an active aggregator. What's interesting to me is to see the intersection between an abundance of capital across the globe chasing the student housing sector with increasing interest rates, increasing construction costs, more difficult to get development deals done, and owner-operators really not having an interest in selling. They really have an interest in recap. And I don't know when that collision happens, what happens as a result of it, but it seems to me that there's a lot of conflicting influences, and I don't know how it plays itself out. But there is an abundance of very large capital sources chasing the sector right now with a more finite amount of opportunities than probably has been historically, especially because you just took out, the largest, aggregated portfolio.
Yeah.
I agree. I'm not sure what's going to happen. It's such a weird time Really, there is so much stuff going on in our economy and in the industry that it's hard to predict. I do think the Blackstone thing was good for ACC, and I'm happy for a lot of my friends over there. I think it'll be good for them, and I think it'll be good for the industry as a whole. I'm pretty certain of that. To your point, I mean, there's just a ton of money in the space. I think the cap rates on conventional are even tighter, so I think that's bringing interest into it as a place to put money. I think the word recession that you hear out there, they talk about student housing being recession resilient, and so I think there's an interest. I think you're going to continue to see cap rates stay compressed for a while, and I still think that, a lot of folks are recapping, but the cap rates are so compressed that I think a lot of owners are going to try and find a way to capitalize one way or another on those prices. But I think for us, we'll stay opportunistic on acquisitions and third party, and I think it's going to continue to be there. So,
from an M&A standpoint, isn't it almost inevitable? It's going to just continue. I mean, you're going to eat or be eaten.
Yeah.
But the good news is, from a day-to-day standpoint, you're going to continue to do the best you can, provide an excellent service to your clients, and then you're going to be rewarded on either side of the food chain. Yeah. So it really doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Okay, if you just focus on what you need to focus on, it's a really good feeling, right?
Yeah, I've told people a lot of years, it's good to be in operations because somebody's got to run the properties one way or another, regardless of what happens. But yes.
So let's talk about development over the next 3 to 5 years. It's development has obviously taken a little bit of a step back through everything. Again, we know what projects are coming out the next 3 to 4 years, but beyond that, what do you see happening? You think it's going to be more P3 versus private development, or?
Man, development just seems like it just keeps coming. So I don't really have a good crystal ball on that either, but I would think they're going to keep building as long as they can still, sell deals once they build them.
Well, I think the underwriting is going to certainly be constrained for development deals in the next 2 to 3 years. Again, interest rate costs, exit cap rates. I don't know whether they compress or not.
Depends on the cap rates, right? Yeah.
But even development costs, supply costs, labor costs put a lot of pressure on that underwriting. It's interesting. One thing, and it'd be interesting to get your guys' perspective, but a phenomenon that is out there within our sector, it doesn't get a lot of press, and I don't know how much it really is happening, but multifamily buyers that are buying underutilized, or not even underutilized, but student housing projects and converting them to multifamily. And nobody's tracking it, ergo an opportunity for somebody to start tracking it, but nobody's tracking it, but certainly it's having an ever so small impact on micro markets, not on a macro market, but on a micro market basis. And I'll give you an example. We manage in Murfreesboro, Middle Tennessee State.
Yeah, Jim and I had a conversation about that recently with CREI taking that property.
There's been, and I'll get this wrong, but no less than 3 to 4 properties that have been converted. And so turn that around the other way. Now, is there not a development opportunity at Murfreesboro for a purpose-built student housing project that wasn't there beforehand because it was maybe an overbuilt student market? So it's just interesting, and it's fascinating to follow that and how much of an impact it will have on selected micro markets.
It's a real thing. It's out there. We're seeing it as well, and it goes into what we were saying before. There's just so many different odd things happening that are out there that I don't think any of us have ever really seen before.
We've got a student property at UNC Charlotte that's doing that, and I'm seeing it more in those urban type markets. Is that, because obviously Murfreesboro is just a
Nashville.
It's a Nashville, yeah.
Is that where you guys are mostly seeing that conversion?
It's where it's hot. Conventional's hot regardless, and so it's just kind of an offshoot of that, I think. So.
Yeah. As Bob says, it really is market driven. The Purdue market, for example, very strong school, very, very strong enrollment, really good president, and they're just they're still coming on with new supply. So, I see those really a separation of the strong versus the not so strong markets.
Sure.
And that's really going to drive the the supply, of course.
Is development in the tier 2, tier 3, is that washed up at this point, you guys think?
In our experience, COVID, I mean, obviously the tier 2s, tier 3s have bigger challenges anyway in terms of filling them up and enrollment. But the tier 2, tier 3s have struggled with enrollment more than the tier 1s. And so I would think, at least for the short term, I mean, I'm hopeful that they come back to at least what they were previously. But that's, if there is any struggle, that's where you're seeing it. So I would have to hope that translates to development slowing down there as well.
We've got a big population decline coming in that age group. And to get back to your point earlier with the underwriting, I don't know if these underwriters understand that or not, and how that's going. I mean, it's not going to impact the flagship universities for sure, but yeah, I'm really concerned about these tier 2 schools for sure. So let's talk about the university side of it and potential challenges and issues that maybe you guys see that they're going to be dealing with, in the near future, that this industry, our industry, the private side of the industry can help them with, not necessarily just P3s, but other initiatives. Any thoughts on that?
It seems like matriculation is becoming more unpredictable. We're seeing like no interest in master leasing, and then all of a sudden 3 months later just beating our doors down. Okay, and by that time it's too late. So I think it's just very hard for them in regard to capacity utilization on the on-campus housing segment when they really don't know who's going to actually come.
Yeah, and COVID's been tough for the universities for sure.
Yeah, every time I talk to every time I talk to anybody on the administration side, but especially if they're in on-campus housing, res life, it's just they've got so many war stories that it's just unbelievable. And I know we've been dealing with it on our end, but to hear some of these stories and obviously some of the politics that are involved with it as well, it's just there's a huge amount of folks that are leaving that industry. Some of them are finding themselves in privatized student housing. Some of them are just leaving.
I think, outside of, the business side of things, but definitely challenges that I think the universities and we're all facing is just kind of mental health in general. Big issue. We hear about it all the time. I think that, today's kids are more likely to say that they have mental health issues. Some of that might just be because it's okay to talk about it, but I think the articles will tell you, just the online experience and everything that goes with that, and maybe not having the ability to cope with things quite as so much, that we just seem to see an uptick in issues and
does that relate to more training that we're going to have to provide to our folks?
I think that we can be better. We can be better as a company. I think we can be better as an industry. It's something that we've really focused on. I mean, we don't have the big res life, in most of our departments, like back in the old days when you had a whole team of people do that. It's just not the way, the current housing is underwritten. But I think we can do a better job of preparing our folks, for what to do, really probably getting better use out of the on-campus resources that are there, and just promoting mental health awareness in general. I mean, it's just one of those things that you just keep hearing about. We just keep hearing, even, it's horrible, unfortunate news within our own portfolios, and I'm sure we all see it at different times. So it's just one of the things that comes to mind.
It's great that you bring that up. It's you're right. There's been an uptick in those type of issues across our portfolio, and it's really too early to talk about this, but I'll talk about it anyway. That there's a small group of operators that will expand to the large group of operators to really pull together a coalition for the sector to be focused on mental health for our residents. And so that's something. Let's put it on your calendar. Maybe 4 months.
Wes, that's something that's not a competitive issue. It's an issue that we all just need to be focused on.
Jen Cassidy brought that up in the recent shop talk.
I'll wake up
last
earlier.
Month too. It was, that's exciting. I love hearing that's coming together. So,
and it impacts our people internally.
That's
I mean,
right.
that type of activity, and
sure.
just really hard on them.
Yeah, No doubt.
Yeah.
I mean, back to the university side, I mean, the fundamentals haven't changed, which is, kids don't want to live in university housing. They want to live where we live, and universities really don't want to be landlords. And so from a big picture macro standpoint, I don't think those fundamentals have changed. I think it's going to be interesting to see if any of the really small tier 3 universities actually shutter. It depends on who you talk to.
Yeah.
Some anticipate a lot, some anticipate fewer. It's hard for me to conceive that you actually see, such and such university go out of business. I mean, it's kind of hard to wrap my head around that, but there's quite a bit of people predicting that they will.
Yeah, I think there probably will be some casualties from that standpoint. I have been encouraged to see a lot of the HBCUs, how they've weathered through this, and a lot of them had positive enrollment growth. I mean, obviously there's some things happening from a from a public funding standpoint that's helping with that. You guys get any more calls on these days on helping out HBCUs versus other four-year universities?
I wouldn't say anything in particular, one way or the other. So.
Gotcha. So next thing, most of our audience is not necessarily the audience here, but the regular listening audience are site level managers, and I hear from them quite a bit. Wes, I've been in this for 5 years, been in it for 8 years. I think I like this, and I just want to know where I can go with it, and and they just start kind of asking questions, and we talk about what they like, what they don't like. But I wanted to kind of pose that question to you guys. I mean, what would you tell that site manager that's listening that is, they've had some successes and they want to see, where they can go with this? What kind of advice would you guys give them?
It's funny. I get asked that question all the time. That's what everybody wants to ask wants to know internally, and it's great because people are ambitious and they're looking to grow their careers.
By the way, I tell most of them by the time we end up with the conversation, they realize they really like being on site.
Yeah,
and they wouldn't be good in a traveling position or whatever.
Yeah, discourage it, right? No, I think it's three things come to mind. First off is some patience. Not in the sense of, this is something where you got to wait your turn or anything like that. This is a merit-driven situation. Going multi-site, and if we're talking about GMs to regionals or something like that, is hard. Yeah. And I don't know how many regionals I've worked with, and I was a regional myself. I've never heard anyone say that it was easy their first 2 years, and I've seen quite a few fail. And so I think that sometimes people try to, they'll get somebody that'll give them the opportunity to take that next level. And maybe they're just not quite ready yet, and they think they're fast-tracking their career, but they're really short-changing it because they go out there and they fail. And nobody wants that. And so it's when you can be the smartest can be, and maybe future, CEO of a company. But in this business, you still have to have a little bit of knowledge to be able to go to that next level, to be able to take care of it. I think that there is this is maybe people won't appreciate. There's a sense of entitlement out there sometimes about, okay, I've been a GM for a year and I did a good job, so I'm ready to be a regional. Yeah. And, it just doesn't, we're not entitled to anything, in what we do. It's all merit driven. And so you got to go out there and prove what you're doing to folks. And, if the worst thing I hate is hearing somebody that comes to you with that kind of, it's my turn now. I've done it. I've worked for a while. And so I think that's you got to get rid of that, any type of entitlement thought process. And lastly, I'd say, and this is big, the people who really grow quickly are able to change their perspective to be that of their supervisor and maybe their supervisor's supervisor. GM's perspective is different than a regional. A VP is different than, they have different purposes. When you can understand what your boss and your boss's boss is doing, what they're thinking, what's important to them, and still understand yours, but understand why that is, those are the people that go up. A lot of times you see people get promoted and they still got a GM state of mind when they're trying to be a regional, and it's not the same thing.
Yeah.
So,
I don't think we need to overcomplicate this. Old-fashioned work ethic is a really good thing. If we could manufacture that, I think there'd be a market. We have this thing called humility, integrity, and accountability. Okay, and if you really think about those three things, if you're in an environment that exudes those things, you're going to want to stay there in that company. And to use an overused word, communicate. Okay, whether it's one-on-one or face-to-face or picking up a phone, or even when you're writing concisely and with clarity and maybe with an action point, okay, and then follow up on it. Really simple, right? If we could just get our people to have a base level of business acumen, just that understanding, kind of like you're talking, Jim, and use data, but don't let data use you. That discernment and that judgment to separate you from the masses, because there's data out there.
Yeah.
There's abundance, and just work for a great company. Don't think about starting compensation. Think about career compensation. Okay, and a company that's going to pay you whatever you want might be a really bad company, because that's all they have to offer is $1, and $1 is the easiest thing to give from a company, from a leadership standpoint. So, career compensation.
Well, thankfully, they didn't answer it the way I would, but I agree 100% with what you each said. I had three thoughts as well. One is, I think everybody at whatever level really needs to focus on their leadership skills. You want a bigger job, you need to be a good leader, period, end paragraph. If you're not a good leader, you're not going to get moved up. It just doesn't happen. So you've got to focus on leadership. What I say inside of Peak is you need to be focusing on improving your leadership skills every day. And every day you need to get better. You need to assess what you did that, you inspired people, and what you did that you kind of fumbled. You got the look from somebody that, you just didn't do it well. Second, I tell people all the time that your career won't go in a straight line. They don't go in a straight line. And the best thing you can do is maybe make a lateral move to a different property or a different market or a bigger property or whatever, but you're still an on-site GM, but you've demonstrated success and you're creating a legacy of success that gives you the ability to be more ready to be a regional manager. And then the last thing I tell our folks that I think is a under-trained, under-focused skill is focusing on one's personal brand. It's fascinating to me that people will come into meetings without a pad and a paper, and I'm sitting there exuding all this brilliance, and they're not writing it down. And it baffles me how they can remember what it is that we're talking about. And I'm writing it down, but they're not writing it down.
Maybe they're recording you.
Well, maybe. You never know. But I think, what I do inside Peak, I'm watching all the time when we have company meetings or opportunities. I'm watching what people say. I watch what they don't say. I watch what they eat. I watch what they don't eat. I watch what they drink. I don't watch what they don't drink. I watch, what they wear, what they don't wear. And it's creating a constant update of my perception of that individual. And I think people take for granted that just because I do a good job, I'm now entitled because I got my property to 98%. But maybe that was a layup. Maybe, well, no, it's never a layup to get 98%, but maybe it was easier than it could have been. But you're not necessarily selling your personal brand the way it should be sold.
I like that. That's a good point. That's a good point. So I'm going to ask you guys one more question since we've got a little bit more time. This isn't one I prepped you for, but we do have in our live audience here, we've got a lot of vendors and service and product suppliers. And I'm always interested from your perspective, what is it that you see in, that our industry is really struggling with right now that maybe they can provide a solution for? Any thoughts on that?
Well, we enjoy turn. That process is great. There's plenty of time that time of year, so we don't need any help there.
Yeah. It's interesting you say that, though. There are some good programs that are out there right now that 10 years ago didn't exist. We were all making it up ourselves or copying each other's programs. But, so there's some good stuff out there.
We're trying a new one this year. So
I mean, I think the only thing I'd say, and this is not going to be a wonderfully specific answer, but it always feels like in real estate, and especially student housing, we're always lagging on the technology curve. And maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe there's an abundance of technology out there, and we're just missing it or whatever. But it just seems to me that there always can be, there always can be more technology offering to create more efficiency within our operations within student housing.
Yeah, and I think there's been a lot of it over the years where they've tried, but they've missed the mark. I mean, students different, and we are small, although not as small as we were compared to conventional. So it's just hard to get people in there to
make the investment.
Yeah, to make the investment. So we're always on the tail end of that, but we're starting to see some stuff.
So I've got to go to a round table here in a little bit, and the topic is, if a recession is coming, what can you do to increase ancillary income and cut expenses? Any thoughts I should give to that whoever attends my round table for that?
Did you say cut expenses?
Cut expenses, yeah.
Okay.
Or at least
it won't be on labor.
Yeah. Well, if you do, if you have any ideas on ancillary income, you shouldn't wait for the recession. You should do those now. Yeah, I mean, that's tough. I mean, I guess we went through this in 2009, what have you. And like we said before, it really wasn't that bad for student. It was different. The timing of the lease up was different, what have you. But I think it goes back to, what we were saying about COVID. I mean, you just got to hunker down, and you gotta guide your team through that. And cutting expenses is, you do it when you can, but that's a double-edged sword, right? When you get into that. So
look at a student housing P&L. The largest expense is payroll.
Yeah.
And in the last 10 years, staffing levels have largely stayed the same. But our part-timers have become, FedEx delivery people because of, all the FedEx packages that are now quadrupled or whatever. And so on the margin, certainly there's always opportunity to save expenses, but I'm not sure that there's an abundance. What I'm really interested to see what happens is this year, at least within our portfolio, I'm sure yours as well, it's unprecedented rent growth across the student housing sector. I don't think we'll ever see
a little bit catch up, but yes,
a little bit of catch up. That's fine. But what happens?
Right.
How does it reset next year? So it is going to be interesting because there is a recession coming. I think there's a little doubt that there's going to be some level of recession across the U.S. And it's just going to be interesting to see how that impacts rental rate growth, especially after this year, and all the other pressure on supply costs and labor costs. Yeah.
So Wes, it could go back to your M&A point. Okay, maybe consolidation and mass, and spreading that. The high cost overhead over more beds is really the answer, and maybe recession will force that.
Yeah. Jim, do you have another point there?
I did, and it was brilliant.
And now it's escaped,
it
right?
Slipped my mind for the moment. Yes.
Well, no, we'll just expand on that a little bit, just a little bit more here in the last couple of minutes. But anything, from an investment standpoint, that you're hearing from folks, with, the rates going up, the things happening from a geopolitical standpoint that are putting pressures on everything. Is there something in the next 2 to 3 years that you guys feel like could really impact us in a negative way from that standpoint?
Gosh, yes. Who knows?
What I would say is, given the amount of capital chasing the sector, it will likely result in people overpaying. They're going to make mistakes. Right. And here's what's happened over the last 5 to 7 years is all the underwriting that was done poorly in the last 5 to 7 years, and certainly there's been abundance of that, it's been saved as a function of cap rate compression. And And so that's not going to happen in the next 2 or 3 years. So a pro forma that was put together in 2019 that was wrong, that was overstated, too hot, it's not going to get saved in the next 2 or 3 years for that sponsor to sell that deal, because cap rates are going to be above what they underwrote. There's no question.
Well, and this doesn't really answer your question, but the reality is when we talk about recession and what you're talking about, it can actually create a tremendous amount of opportunities, right?
Yeah.
And so, unfortunately, to your point, Bob, it's at the expense of somebody that, quite frankly, paid too much.
Yep.
But we've been through that cycle before, and we've seen that the folks that have the ability to buy, during those times when those problems arise, can sometimes, get some really good opportunities out of it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think about all the CMBS stuff that was written right after the Great Recession, and that stuff's coming up on their 10-year maturity dates, right? And between now and, say, 2025, 2026, it's going to be interesting if they haven't recapped on that stuff, what's going to happen if all this kind of comes together. So
I think you're trying to scare us.
These are things I think about at night. I really do.
3 a.m. is the best time to dwell on that.
Well, guys, thanks so much for taking some time out at Interface. I know you guys have got a ton of meetings and a lot of things you guys are trying to accomplish, but thanks so much for spending time with our audience and giving your perspectives. And if there's anything Student Housing Insight can do for your companies and to help you guys promote what you're doing, please let us know. But thanks so much for being here today.
Thanks, Wes.
Thank you very much, Wes.